In February of 2019, the museum contacted me to put together a team of experts. They wanted to investigate whether or not their collection of Dead Sea Scrolls was in fact authentic. This project was initiated because since 2002, many previously unknown textual fragments inscribed in Hebrew and Aramaic have surfaced on the antiquities market. They were believed to be newly discovered biblical artifacts belonging to the canon of the Dead Sea Scroll discovery. The Museum of the Bible curates over a dozen of these fragments, and 13 were published by a team of scholars. At the time of publication, no full-scale scientific examination of the post-2002 fragments had been conducted. Scholars have expressed growing concern about the authenticity of these fragments. The museum put together a team of experts, an independent advisory team that consisted of scientists, conservators, and imaging experts.
I am head of book and paper conservation at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. And my own particular specialty is the conservation of medieval manuscripts on parchment. Back in the early 1990s, I was involved in a project with the original Dead Sea Scrolls at the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. So I have some familiarity with the Dead Sea Scrolls and how they were made and how they've deteriorated over time and how they've been restored and conserved.
I am the Andrew W. Mellon Professor of Conservation Science at Buffalo State College, SUNY. I am originally an archaeologist. I worked in Israel, and in the past few years I've been working in Honduras and Belize. And since then I've developed more of a scientific perspective to look at the materials that come out of the ground. So my specialty is in inorganics, metals, glass, and ceramics in particular, but the analysis of materials in general. For this project, I'm focusing on looking at the elemental concentrations within the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I'm using a technique called X-ray fluorescent spectroscopy. It's a machine that allows you to look at the elements that are inside the Dead Sea Scrolls or any material you want to look at, and it produces a spectrum that indicates which elements are present. From that, I can then build a three-dimensional model of what is there and pinpoint the locations within the Dead Sea Scroll where a particular element may be.
We now know that there was much information to be gained from studying the fragments under different wavelengths of light, under high magnification, identifying the materials from which they were made, and analyzing the materials deposited on their surfaces. We started with imaging. Multispectral imaging was conducted on the fragments to collect information that was not visible with the naked eye. The team went about examining the fragments with both traditional and 3D microscopes, allowing them to examine each fragment and discover important clues about their material properties.
One thing we're doing is trying to understand whether the support material was actually parchment or whether it's leather.
Our research focused on the substrate or writing surface material, the ink that was used to write the lines of scripture, and the surface deposits that had accumulated on them as a result of time and storage. A subset of the collection was then selected and sampled for a full elemental and molecular profile.
The process is fairly simple. There's the machine which is mounted on a platform. The actual bed of the machine moves back and forth in an X and Y direction so we can capture information in a two-dimensional map space. And attached to that is also a helium flow, and the helium allows us to look at elements that are a little lighter in nature, so they don't have a lot of energy with them, and the air itself can stop those elements from reaching the detector in the machine.
Through physical examination, it was determined that the substrate of the museum's scroll fragments appears to be leather rather than the parchment that is characteristic of the authentic Dead Sea Scrolls. Scientific analysis further concluded that the raw skins that were used as writing material appears to have been treated with lime, which is a technology that postdates the original scrolls. The origin of the substrate leather is unknown, but appears to be scraps of archaeological leather that could have originated in Qumran or the Dead Sea region. One of the things that we found to be really interesting is that some of the holes on the fragments appear to be man-made. Instead of being made by insects boring through the material, we think they look more like the lacing holes you would find on ancient Roman shoes or sandals. There was so much physical evidence that made it obvious to us that someone had taken old material and simply applied modern ink in the form of scripture in order to make them look like they were authentic Dead Sea Scrolls. As we can see here, ink is going across and into deep cracks in the substrate. The ink is also skipping over high points of the grain layer and waterfalls off the edges of the fragments. Here you can see it lying on top of thick granular mineral deposits. Obviously, 2,000 years ago, scribes would have used clean parchment for their writing. We also noticed abnormal ruling lines were evident on some of the fragments. Also seen here, a variety of loose mineral deposits were scattered over the fragments after writing, perhaps even before the ink had dried, in order to give the impression that these were authentic Dead Sea Scroll fragments that had come from the Qumran caves and had been buried there for centuries. There were many other things that were also suspicious about these fragments. All of them, despite being purchased from different sources, were remarkably similar in that they were coated with a shiny amber material, most likely animal skin glue. We believe the fragments might have been further manipulated to simulate the surface appearance of original scrolls. We can conclude, and in fact we unanimously agreed, that none of the fragments in the Museum of the Bible's collection are in fact authentic. Not only are they not authentic, they are deliberate and clever forgeries designed to look like original Dead Sea Scrolls. It's not welcome news, but there's a really positive outcome here. And the positive outcome is that the museum has sponsored this rigorous scientific protocol. And this protocol can be used by other museums and institutions that have questioned fragments in their collections. So in that way, the field benefits from all this research and from all the transparency that the museum is committed to.